There we go. Good evening, everybody. Welcome. Just wait for everybody to join. I can see everybody landing in now. There's about 50 people so far. I think we've got over 100 registered this evening, which is great. So whilst you're joining, if you want to maybe let us know where you're watching from this evening, let us know in the chat where you are. Formby, Crosby, oh yeah, local. Yeah, we've got a local audience.
Triangle. Crosby. Peter from Crosby.
Oh, I recognise a lot of these names.
Mandy and Phil. Oh, it's lots of local people this time. Where was there was somebody from Cheshire last time, wasn't there?
Yeah. Preston.
There was someone from Liverpool, but in Dorset last time, I think, as well.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Right, we've got about 80 so far. So,
brilliant. Waterloo, Widnes. Just around the corner in Maghull.
Right, okay, there'll probably be a few more people trickling in, but we'll get going. So welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Victoria, and I'm joining you tonight from the central team at Lancashire Wildlife Trust, and I'm joined here by our Lunt Meadows project manager, Cheryl, Molly, who is our communications and engagement officer, and Adam, our reserve officer at Lunt Meadows. Just a little bit of housekeeping. So all your cameras are going to be switched off throughout this evening, and you will be on mute, so don't worry about being quiet. We will be recording the event tonight, so if you end up having to leave, then you will be able to watch it again if you choose to. If you want to have a chat with us, ask us any questions, comments, then you can do that in the chat function or in the Q&A. So for those of you not so familiar with Lancashire Wildlife Trust, we are a nature conservation charity, and we look after over 50 wildlife sites across Lancashire, Manchester and North Merseyside, from Lunt Meadows to Brockholes in Preston, Mersonswood in Rufford, right up to Wharton Crag in Silverdale. Part of our work is also to connect people with nature and encourage others to care about the natural world so we can protect it. Now, unfortunately, we've not been able to run our events face to face like we would be doing at the moment. So we've been trying to deliver as much of them online as possible, and hopefully as things get better over the next few months, we'll be able to return to some face-to-face events as well. So we are a charity, and conservation costs. Many of you will already be members, but if you're not and you're able to, please consider becoming a member or making a donation to help us continue our work. Now, Adam is going to be talking to you this evening about the wildlife of Lunt Meadows, which is just one of the many interesting stories of the site. So some other events that we've got coming up over the next few weeks. On the 24th of March, there's an event all about how Lunt Meadows is a flood storage reservoir. So again, after this event tonight, if you've enjoyed it, if you want to find out more, you can book onto that event just as you have done this evening. That'll be on Zoom as well. And then there's another one on the 7th of April, which is all about the prehistoric stories of Lunt Meadows as well. So you can find out more about that on our website, and there will be an email coming out after the event this evening to tell you a bit more about that. So if you've got any questions, myself, Molly and Cheryl will be manning the chat tonight, so hopefully we can get through as many of those as possible. And before I hand over to Adam, I thought we could just start with a bit of a question just to get some feedback about sort of the wildlife that you're interested in at Lunt Meadows. So hopefully you can all see that question there. It might just help us when we come to maybe planning some more in-person events or guided walks, hopefully going forwards. I've only been to Lunt Meadows twice, actually. Well, I say twice. The first time, I didn't even get out of the car because it was a really stormy winter's day, and it's very exposed, isn't it? Yeah. And there was like horizontal rain, and I was with Rachel Cripps, and so we didn't even get out of the car for that one. And then last summer, I visited, it was just as we were coming out of lockdown, and I met Fiona Whitfield on site. And it was a really, really hot day. And she said, I got there, I met her in the car park, and she said, have you got your sun cream and your insect spray and any antihistamines? I said, oh, I don't have hay fever. I've never suffered hay fever. And she said, a lot of people say that until they come to Lunt Meadows. And she was right, because I have never, ever felt hay fever before. But I guess the clue's in the name, isn't it, really? So, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, there's always extremes of weather and everything at Lunt.
So we've got a lot of keen birders there, but a nice mix of interests.
Yeah.
Everybody's interested in all the wildlife.
Some in bats.
Yes.
That's good.
Lovely. Okay, Adam, I shall hand over to you to tell us about the wildlife of Lunt Meadows.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Some of you I will know, some of you I won't. If it helps place me, you've probably seen me driving around Lunt in an old red minibus or on site in a high-vis jacket. So yeah, that's me. So yeah, I'm going to talk about the wildlife at Lunt, and I guess I thought, rather than just going through what's there and kind of showing you a lot of images, it's really trying to put the wildlife in the context of the habitats. So kind of talking about what we have, where we're going, and the changes that we want to make on site for the target species that we have. So I guess with Lunt, with the habitats, well, with all aspects of Lunt really, the site's very much in a journey, and we're very much at the beginning of that journey. There's so much work that we have to do to get the site right, to get the habitats right, for the wildlife that we want to attract. So yeah, I guess that the talk's very much about that. Yeah, Lunt it's a work in progress really. There's a lot of things we have to do. So yeah, I guess the talk's about how we hope to bring the site to life, and the work that's ongoing there. So what I'm going to try and do hopefully is do a screen share to bring up a presentation which we'll run through. Okay, so hopefully that's working for everybody. So I guess before I launch into things, it's probably just worth talking about the HLF project, and again just putting that in context really. So for my part, I've worked in Lunt for about 5 years as a reserve officer now. Initially part-time, 2 days a week, and then 3 days a week. So I guess that kind of give you the time. You could see a lot of the problems on site, you could see a lot of the issues, but you didn't really have time to actually do a lot of things about them, which was quite frustrating. So with the HLF project, which has started just before Christmas, and that'll run for 5 years, for myself that means the reserve officer role at Lunt is now full-time, 5 days a week. So that actually gives us time to start to address some of the problems on site, some of the challenges we have, and just to undertake a lot of the management work that we need to undertake there. So it's a really big step forward really. The work that we do on site, again, I'm not sure, I suppose, the knowledge on sort of managing conservation sites, but everything that we do is guided by a management plan. So it's not like it's kind of random tasks that you're working out, you know, what will we do this month, or what we do today. We've got very clear objectives for the habitats, really looking 25 years ahead. and that's all within the management plan. So I guess having that 5 years funding, it's a really good, I suppose, just that building block of starting to work through the management plan to deliver some of those objectives. So yeah, it's just a really good place to start. So in terms of the slides, what I'm going to talk about, I thought it would be useful just to start with some orientation and talk a bit about the hydrology on site. Hydrology is something that is probably the thing I get asked about most on site, and it kind of underpins basically everything that's going on with the wildlife and a lot of the issues and challenges that we have on the site. So I guess just to run through what we've got, you've essentially got 4 main habitat blocks. So we have 2 areas of reed bed on site, which probably will give us between, well, hopefully about 25 hectares of reed bed in time, as that reed that we've got there expands and develops. We've also got then 2 wet grassland blocks, which is probably about 27 hectares, including I guess the wet areas that are underwater. And possibly what people are less familiar with, we've got this block of dry grassland that we're working to develop as sort of species-rich grassland. I'll talk about a bit more about that later, but it's essentially these 4 habitat blocks and then what will be species-rich grassland. In terms of the hydrology, the system is what we would call a perched system. So I guess what that means, you've basically got the existing land drains from the wider catchment, and they run through the site, but they're separated from it. So you can kind of follow these blue lines running through. These are the old land drains. So they feed through the site, and that water is taken to the pump and then uplifted into the River Alt. Our site, as I say, it's hydrologically separated from that. So we can bring water in through, there's an inlet which I sort of have control over, with yeah, you can kind of open it and shut it down. So we can basically let as much or as little water in as we want in a controlled way to control the levels across site. Then obviously you've got the spillway as well, which lets water in, and it just obviously when the site overtops in a flood event. So that's uncontrolled, but by and large the water that comes into the site is through this inlet that we do control. So once that comes into the site, it runs through the reed bed, it's piped across the drainage ditches into the wet grassland, and then either on into this wet grassland or into the second reed bed, and then the water comes together and it flows back into the River Alt through a gravity sluice, which is just a pipe with a flap in the end. So that's essentially how it works. The outlet is set at a height of 3 meters above sea level, which gives us basically a working height of a 3 meter flood footprint across the site. So that's 3 meters above sea level. So yeah, this map just shows that kind of flood footprint of the wetland area. And I guess one of the things just to highlight, this map's sort of schematic, so it's not totally true to life, but if you just keep in mind that, I don't know if you can see that the arrow, the pointer I've got, but the kind of straightness of the wetland edge, especially within the wet grasslands, it's relatively short, kind of just runs from A to B. I'll pick that up later, but it's just something to bear in mind. So this is kind of as technical as it gets tonight, but I wanted to share this map because it underpins it again, just a lot of the situation on site with just a lot of the issues and the hydrology as well. So this is a LiDAR map which is showing basically ground levels at Lunt. So I guess just to explain it, it's basically heights above sea level in the key. So 1 to 1.5 is basically 1 to 1.5 meters above sea level. But I suppose for the purposes of this, basically the darker the color, lower lying, the ground level, or basically the deeper the water in that area when we have the water up to 3 meters. So yeah, the darker blues are basically the deepest water, the lowest lying levels of the site. And the lighter coloured areas are the highest and driest bits of the site. So there's a few things that I wanted to point out in this. I guess the first one is in terms of the wet grasslands. Again, I hope you can orientate yourselves on this map. It didn't actually occur, but I'm hoping that you can see my pointer. But possibly not. Yeah, you can. Right, good. So yeah, with the wet grasslands, I guess the thing that I wanted to point out, you've got this very gradual sort of colour change, so going through the blues and into green and yellow. So I guess with that, what I suppose I'm trying to point out is you've got a sort of very simple, if you imagine, I guess a cross section running through that wet grassland up towards the hedgerow and the high ground. You've basically got a sort of very simple, gently rising profile, and the implications of that. I guess one of the main habitats that we'd want on the wet grasslands and that we'd want to encourage is that kind of muddy margin that a lot of the wading birds like. But I guess that simple rising profile, it kind of makes the wetland edge quite short. You know, if you imagine a line from A to B, basically just running across or just following around that sort of blue area, that's essentially, you know, would be your wetland edge at that height. So it's relatively kind of simple and straight from yeah, just taking a line from A to B. And I guess the other side of that sort of that profile, it tends to give us a situation where things are basically either wet or dry. Everything on one side of the line is basically wet or underwater, and then everything on the higher side of that sort of water line is basically dry, which is causing us some problems in the wet grassland. But I'll come back to that later. The other thing, again, if you imagine the flows of water through the site that we talked about in the last slide, so the water is coming into the reed bed, on into the wet grassland and basically back into the reed bed. It's a bit simplistic, but I suppose essentially the reed bed is basically a deeper water habitat. The wet grassland would be a shallower water habitat. So you've kind of got, in terms of the water flows through the site, you've got basically this shallow water habitat kind of wedged in between the two deep water habitats. And then if you look, the second reed bed, the land levels in there, it's basically the highest bit of the site. The land levels in that typically come up to usually about 3.2 to 3.4 meters above sea level in this back area. So it's kind of the highest, driest bit of the site. So to get that wet, to get it the way we need it, you've kind of got to bring the levels up right across site, and in turn, you basically you sort of bring the levels up much higher than you'd like in the wet grassland, and sort of drowning that in the process. So to me, it kind of sets up a situation. It's like a tension on site, sort of a compromise between the wet grasslands and the reed beds, just with getting the levels right. So that's, I suppose, just to talk about attention a bit more in this slide. So this is sort of just showing the typical water profile that we would have across site in a typical year. So this is from 2018, but what we try to do in the winter is basically turn the inlet up as high as we can, get as much water into the reed beds as possible. So you're bringing the levels up to 3 meters, 3.2 meters, thereabouts. Basically, just get as much water into the reed beds as we can. Then try to drop the levels down. Waders tend to start to move through really sort of April, and then obviously they'll breed on site, and then you've got the kind of autumn wader passage. So it's trying to get mud, trying to get things right in the wet grasslands for those birds to come on. Yeah, dropping the levels down towards the autumn, and then basically cranking them back up again to get the water back into the reed beds for the winter. But as I say, that there's a tension in that. There's sort of compromises. So it basically makes the reed bed quite a bit too dry. This is reed bed 2. It makes that much too dry in the summer, which is basically limiting the spread of reed. This is taken sort of from the middle of reed bed 2, looking back towards the hide. So that dryness is limiting the spread of reed out, and obviously you can see there's bramble coming in there, there's scrub, basically all the things that shouldn't really be in your reed bed that you don't really want in there. On the other side of that then, if you look at this picture, this is again just looking over the area that we call the Gorgony Scrape. These are some of the little island sort of features that we put in, but there's quite a lot of lapwing roosting on that in that picture. But again, that tends to be what the site's like, you know, coming into the autumn. But as soon as you turn the water up to basically to get the reed bed wet enough, you lose a lot of these roosting areas. You lose a lot of the rushy areas that things would, you know, you'd get a lot of snipe in those in the winter. Basically, you lose all your wading birds as soon as you bring the level up to get the water into the reed bed areas. So it's a bit of a balancing act. I guess that point where you bring the levels up. I mean, in winter, the winter counts of lapwing, you can have up to 3,500 lapwing in sight. But the last 2 winters, we've had flood events in the autumn, which have brought the levels up quite quickly overnight. And you literally go from having that number of birds on site to, you might just have 100 in the morning. They've all just deserted because you've lost a lot of those sort of higher features that they're roosting on and breeding on. So I guess, I know I'm talking about the hydrology here, but it's kind of just to illustrate, I suppose, that tension on site and the challenges. For me, making the site better for wildlife, it's kind of resolving those issues. It's about, I guess, on the one hand, trying to get more water into the reed beds and holding it there for longer. But it's also about making the wet grasslands much more resilient to those times of high water when we do have birds on site, and to keep them there. So yeah, some pictures of birds at last. Yeah, these are just some pictures of some of the birds that we do have on site. These are just some of the waders. So yeah, top shot is a snipe and a ruff. Snipe, we get really big numbers on site in the winter. I think counts of 300 to 400, which is really, really good coming into the autumn. They very much like the rushy habitat. And then the taller bird beside that is a ruff. They are more of the passage wader on site, but they would come through really from, you know, April, May into early summer. We might have sort of usually up to about 10 of those on site. Black-tailed godwit, there's quite a few of those on site at the minute. Current count's about 150. There was 250 on a couple of weeks ago, which is probably as much as I've seen on there. So again, they're another passage wader that we get moving through the wet grasslands. All those species tend to really like that sort of muddy edge that we have. And obviously great crested grebe at the bottom. They've moved into the site probably about 3 or 4 years ago. And again, they breed there now. It's been interesting to watch the sort of fish-eating birds move onto the site as the habitats have developed. I guess as the fish populations have developed, bearing in mind it's a new site, and yeah, I guess it takes time for, you know, I think those populations to come in and expand. So yeah, it's been really good to watch birds like grebe start to move in and to breed. And which again is one of the passage waders. Like the snipe, it seems to like the sort of rushy edges that we have on Lunt. So that's a bird that we get moving through quite often early summer. You might get 6 of those moving through in that period. So yeah, it's one to look out for. And again, it's that sort of muddy edge tends to bring those birds in. in terms of how the site's actually doing for birds, yeah, it's really, really good. I mean, bearing in mind, it was a field of potatoes 10 years ago. At the minute we're up to, so let's find the, yeah, we've got, in terms of birds that have actually been recorded on site to date, we're at 153 species, which is really, really good. In terms of, I guess, the breeding species that we have on site, that these are sort of the target species that the site is for. We're up to, yeah, we had a peak of 24. It's really what 23. We had 24 in 2019. There was a black-necked grebe pair attempted to breed that year, so that brought us up to 24 wetland bird species that year, but back really to 23 now. But that's fantastic. As I say, they're all the target species that the site is for. And in terms of breeding pairs, just of all those sort of target species, all those wetland birds, at the minute we're on about 230 breeding pairs a year, which again is great. And as you can see, that the trend of that should go up, and hopefully will continue to go up. Whereas, yeah, the number of actual wetland bird species that we have will probably level out pretty well where it is. I've just pulled out in this table just some of the birds that we do have on site, the waterfowl, the wading birds, the wetland passerines. They're sort of the perching birds, sort of the small birds, so things like Chetty's warbler, reed bunting, reed warbler, that kind of thing. Yeah, the numbers in brackets are basically the 5-year breeding averages. But yeah, so what have we got? Yeah, Gorgoney is a very good record on site. They tend to breed, usually have one per year. There's probably maybe about 100 pairs would breed in the country in a year, so it's very good to have them on site. Again, they like the sort of the rushy habitat, the rushy edge. Yeah, we have a good number of waterfowl that come on. Wading birds, lapwing is probably the main target species that we have. Also redshank. I think we had one redshank breeding attempt a few years ago, but we've not had any since. Avocet have colonised the site a few years ago, and they seem to be doing quite well. They seem to come back to the same island, the same point every year. The same birds, I guess, are coming back. So yeah, they seem to have established a colony, which again is great. And obviously the wetland passerines, they seem to go up year on year, the numbers, so that's great. Yeah, and obviously then there's kind of the non-wetland birds that we have. So obviously barn owl, most people will know on site, linnet, whitethroat, yeah, all those sorts of things that would just breed around the site. Wintering birds, again, yeah, bearing in mind the field was a field of potatoes, we've now got regionally significant numbers of quite a few species in the winter. So again, the numbers in brackets, they're just sort of the 5-year mean counts of individuals up to 2018. So yeah, teal, it's a very good site for teal. I think the peak counts for teal are just under 2,000 in a winter. So we get a lot of those on. There's a lot on at the minute. Lapwing, you get huge numbers in the winter through the autumn. Again, I think the peak counts are about 3,800. So yeah, it draws a lot of those in, so long as, yeah, we can keep the levels relatively low. Bittern, we've typically had one bird come in over the past 3 winters. We actually had 2 last year, which was great. So there's one on site this winter as well. So they're overwintering, and we've had, yeah, the past 2 years we've had booming bittern as well. They've not stayed to breed, but we've had a male that's had a bit of a go at booming, probably just tuning up, and then they've moved on, but that's quite positive. And yeah, obviously short-eared owl, most people will know the site for. Numbers of those, yeah, average about 6. I think peak has been probably about 12 birds, some years 1. It's quite hard to know. Some years they just don't show very well. Other years they show quite, yeah, show quite regularly. The birds that, I suppose in terms of the future, the birds that I think will increase, or well, I would hope we can increase, are the numbers of wading birds and also the wetland passerines. I'll come back to that. So yeah, this was just to show, as I said, we've got sort of 23 species, wetland species at the minute, and the ones that potentially we could still get, hopefully we may get, yeah, these are the ones that are missing. So bearded tipped is one that I really hope we will get breeding on site. They've come in again to winter in small numbers the past couple of years. I think our reed beds, they're too wet at the minute. They're not really mature enough. But I guess, yeah, they're coming in and having a look anyway. So hopefully, as the reed expands and we get some kind of drier, they seem to prefer drier reed. Hopefully, yeah, they would stay and breed. Marsh harrier, again, are pretty common on site, especially in the autumn. We've had sort of 3 to 4 birds coming in and roosting. We did have one quite early in the reserve sort of history, probably about 2015. There was a female did come in and had a good, seemed to keep coming into the same area of rush, but yeah, they didn't breed, but hopefully in time, yeah, as the reed expands, potentially that's a bird that we could get breeding on the site. But yeah, they're seen quite commonly, and I guess bitterns the big one. I don't know, will we get it? The reed bed is probably just on the limit size-wise. I think generally they say anything above 20 hectares, so it's possible. You never know. That's kind of the bird that we're managing the reed beds for, but in managing for that species, you kind of create the conditions for a lot of other things. So yeah, hopefully, you never know. I think it's the female bittern that's generally quite fussy. So we've kind of had males booming, but we've not had a female come in and yeah, set up shop, as it were. So I guess to do that, yeah, we need more reed. We need the reed to be much wetter than we've got. So again, it comes back to that kind of tension about getting the reed better, but protecting the wet grasslands. Just because it's Lunt Meadows wildlife, I felt I had to put in a picture of an owl. So yeah, obviously the site is very well known for barn owls and short-eared owls. Little owl is resident locally as well, so it's quite commonly seen on site. I think the record for owls in one day is barn owl, short-eared owl, long-eared owl, and little owl, which was pretty exceptional. So yeah, it's obviously very well known for its owls. I guess, yeah, moving on to I said the birds that the numbers that I think will increase are those sort of passerines and the wading birds as well. So this map shows, it's basically a distribution map of where things are breeding on site. So I guess if you kind of just go by the colours, so the kind of blues and purples are those wetland passerines. So yeah, reed bunting, sedge warbler, reed warbler, and then the yellows through to reds, they're more the wading birds. So it's been interesting just to watch how those birds have spread on site in the time that I've been there. Initially, I guess historically, you've got the old ditch network on site, and that's where the reed was. So you could see, if you'd plotted this map in sort of 2014, 2015, those dots, triangles, the birds were literally just nesting in those old ditch lines. Then obviously as we've planted reed and the reed started to establish, you could see the birds starting to move basically into the main reed bed areas. So there's a real concentration of nests. Again, if you know the site, the best area of reed really is in this corner of reed bed 1. And doing the nest mapping, that's really where the majority of these birds are now found, and again spreading out in this band of reed around the site. You can almost watch them move with the reed year on year, and again now moving into reed bed 2, we've been able to see them, move into these areas as well. So that gives me quite a bit of hope that those numbers will grow, and I think we'll have considerably more than the sorts of numbers we get at the minute. I think, reed bunting is probably about 20 nests at the minute. Sage warbler it varies year on year, but I think again it's probably about 10 to 20 nests, up to a peak of, I think there was 25 one year. So yeah, sage warbler is probably the most common one. There's about 40 nested last year. But yeah, so moving through, this is the same map, but the area in green, that shows, if you like, the eventual extent of reed that we're aiming for on site, the kind of the full 25 hectares. So if you imagine these birds, well, basically dots, if you imagine that they're basically moving with the reed as it spreads, so they should move right through. We should be getting a lot of things breeding here, in these areas that are basically blank, supplemented of course by the populations that they still breed in the ditches. So yeah, I'm really hopeful about those. I think numbers will go up a lot. We have regionally significant populations of those breeding on site at the minute. So yeah, that's really good. The other one, the waders are interesting. So yellow dots are avocet, and if you notice, well, they seem to, obviously the avocet are very much tied to the islands that we've put on site. So you might know Avocet Island here. That's essentially where they breed year on year. We had one breeding attempt on this island, which we put in a couple of years back. So yeah, very much tied to the islands, and the same with the red dots or ringed and little ring plover. And again, they seem to breed very much in the lagoons. Again, they like the islands, they like this island, the islands in front of the Gorgony screen, they very much like, and around this sort of muddy margin. In wet grassland 2, wet grassland 3, they seem to like, but very much tied to these areas. So I guess the thinking with that is about putting in more islands. It's about more wet edge really. The lapwing, again, the lapwing are strange. They nest dominantly in the car park field rather than on what you would think of as the wet grasslands. So I think there's about 3 nesting on there at the minute, or certainly seem to be setting up territories. So yeah, they seem to nest here first, and then they will nest on the wet grasslands basically later, sort of in a second breeding attempt, or ones that have failed elsewhere will have another go. So generally they move on to the wet grasslands in probably in about May. That's when you tend to find the nests, and again, it's always pretty well in the same locations in this area and these sort of areas on wet grassland 1. I'm not totally sure why that is. I suspect. Well, there's a number of factors. I suspect the wet grasslands are too dry. We've not got the grazing quite right so far, so it's tended to be either slightly too long or quite often too short. I suspect it's the fact that it's too short is why they're moving on slightly later in the breeding season when the grass is growing a little bit. Again, just the fact the locations where they're breeding, it tends to be against kind of the rushy edge, which makes me think it's possibly, they're potentially looking for cover, and more cover that they're getting kind of in the middle of the wet grasslands. We did a study on some of the beetle populations as well. Again, comparing the wet grasslands and comparing actually Dave Ruffley's field, and what we found, the highest populations of beetle on site are actually in these margins here. So that would probably be one of the things that the lapwing chicks would be fed on. So we did wonder if that was a factor, again, why they're setting up in this area. But yeah, I guess what was I going to say? Those themes of work at Lunt, again, it just comes back to, I suppose, the challenges in hydrology. to get those bird numbers to expand, on the one hand, it's about getting the reed beds wetter, allowing that reed to expand to its full extent, but at the same time kind of protecting the wet grasslands, putting in more islands, trying to make the wet grasslands function at a higher level, so things still have places to breed. You know, these islands tend to disappear at high level, so in previous years we've had avocet come on, but the islands are slightly too low, so birds will come, they'll sit and wait, but the islands don't really appear, so a lot of the birds will just move through. So that certainly happened last year with the avocet. We had quite a number that seemed to be waiting for the islands to appear, but it was too late by the time they sort of broke the surface, and a lot of those birds had left. So yeah, that's sort of the challenge. So moving on, yeah, this is, I guess, moving more into the work that we actually want to do. We've been quite lucky. We've had some funding from BIFA, about 50,000 for working the site this year. And a big theme of that work is this sort of reprofiling that we're talking about. So this is a sketch. It's just schematic of reed bed 2. I was just trying to doodle kind of what's in my head of what we'd like to do. And again, this is about basically trying to get more water back out of the channels onto the plateaus that to stay quite dry. So it's basically about putting in channels, putting in some deeper water pools, basically trying to get the water to move back and move through these areas, which will hopefully bring the reed with it. It'll help the reed to pool later into the summer if we do have to drop the levels slightly, just basically make that area more resilient, make it better for reed and these target species that we're trying to get in there. We'll probably add, it'd be nice to do a bit of profiling in those kind of visible areas as well, so you know, bring some fingers of water back so you can kind of see between the reed and again opposite the hide. And something else, we've got this internal bund in reed bed 2. Obviously we've had the big flood event in the past month. There's talk about putting in another spillway in the embankment. Possibly alongside that, we're hopeful, well, we're trying to wangle another inlet into reed bed 2, and that would really change things. Rather than having to bring the water right up very high to, if you like, to hold it within that kind of 3 metre wetland footprint, if we can bring water in kind of separately, we can basically pull it against this bund as we want and pretty well right through the year. So that really expands the area for reed. It makes us much wetter, which would be great. And again, we kind of continue that theme of, this is, sorry, I should have said, the blue, the area that's highlighted in blue is basically the kind of simple channels that we have at the minute. The bits, the kind of squiggly bits are kind of my sketches of what we would kind of dig and excavate off those. So yeah, this top area at the minute, we've really just got this channel running through. So it's about pulling these sort of kind of sub channels off that, just pulling the water out into the reed bed. So yeah, if we can get an additional inlet put in, it will be great. But regardless, just doing the work. Yeah, that we've got the funding for at the minute, I think it will really help on the reed beds. And to continue that, again, this is wet grassland 2. Sorry, no, it's not. It's wet grassland 3. And again, this is just my kind of sketches of what potentially we would like to do in there. So again, a lot of you will know this area. That's Avocet Island, just to orientate yourself. Gargany Pool, Broadland Track. It's this sort of area here. So again, it's basically about reprofiling in there, trying to increase that kind of muddy, wet edge. So yeah, there's so much we can do in here. What I'd like to do potentially is cut a channel sort of back through this area, again with kind of sort of channels running off that, pulling the water back onto the wet grasslands, some scrapes, and then with the spoil, the muck that you're pulling out of that, you can create more islands, potentially a big island here, which is, this area kind of exposes in the autumn, but some years it doesn't, it's just a bit too low. So if we could build that up, yeah, if we could cut through the trackway, So I've had to cut through the trackway, again, just to turn this into another island. And obviously build up Habitat Island slightly, so it's basically, it's there all year, and yeah, the Habitat can use that basically straight off. And again, yeah, just more channels coming back on. So yeah, and again, we've got straight edges here. It's about maximising that muddy edge, so just reprofiling, just messing them up basically. So rather than kind of sort of A to B line, you're kind of putting in a lot of wiggles and squiggles. Yeah, just sort of indents and building out in places. So yeah, you're just increasing the total length of that margin. Yeah, so that's kind of, I think for the wetland excavation, this work will happen late this summer. For the wetland excavation, we've got about 35,000, which seems like a lot of money, but it just, there's so much work to do and it's quite expensive, so it just disappears. But I'm hopeful we can certainly do these two areas and get them right. The other thing the BIFA money will pay for, I should have said, sorry, oops, in that slide. Again, we're quite conscious as it's a new site, there's not, if you look at the aquatic plants, the oxygenators, there's not really that much is colonised yet. There's the odd patch of broadleaf pondweed, but not much more. So I'm quite conscious about that. So BIFA, again, that's supporting planting in a lot of sort of the deeper water aquatics, things that would help. Yeah, just oxygenate the water for fish, which again are quite critical within the weed bed for things like bittern. So yeah, there's quite a bit of work in that as well. And I forgot to mention the reed planting, just I should say, the reed beds that we've got on site, we've planted, yeah, that's all planted in. So there's been probably about 40,000 plugs of reed have gone in so far. Within this BIFA work, I think around this planting, we'll probably plant about another 5,000 reed plugs, and that again will just help the reed move back into those areas. So there'll be a lot of volunteer work on all that planting. Where are we? And that was just to show we have done some of this work already. This was funded by Veolia back in 2017, I think. So you can kind of say, do you know, I was kind of saying the wetland edge is sort of relatively short. That kind of muddy margin is short. So you can kind of see, these are kind of my squiggles turned into reality. So we've dug kind of in this area, and this area, and you can kind of see those channels that have been added. So that's basically given us much more wet margin for the wading birds. So rather than say just having 100 meters of wet edge here, you've now got on each side of this channel, you've maybe given yourself another, I don't know, another 200 linear meters. So basically adding in these channels, it's just increasing the muddy edge. So yeah, the area that we'll work on, that my sort of sketch was basically this area, and yeah, that's the reed bed 2 area. I would really like to do something in this area as well. That's one of the future really. It's quite low lying here, but there's a lot of potential. This bund that runs off the first screen has potential. I think that would make, if we could smash through the bund and basically pull it out into, basically make it into an island, and there's such a lot of earth in this, again, just pull it out into the channel. I think it would be a fantastic bit of habitat, and yeah, just pulling the water back onto this wet grassland I think would be great. But yeah, that's going to take a bit more funding. Yeah, so that's kind of just to show this work in progress, and it is working. Again, these are the same features. So this is the area in front of the Gargany screen. You can kind of see those fingers of water that we've pulled back. That's given us a lot of wet edge. These are ringed little ring plover that seem to really like breeding on those. We've put a bit of gravel on those as well, although they're not, they need a bit of TLC. And again, this is a channel that we've dug through. We've added these islands a few years ago, so they're not really quite high enough. They need building up, and that's where the avocet are breeding at the minute. So yeah, more of those features. It's just more nests, more wading birds. And so if we can build those features higher, that's where you kind of make the wet grassland more resilient to deep water, and just pulling them back into the drier grassland, the areas that don't get wet. Again, it just helps make just makes the thing more resilient. So you can have your wet grasslands wetter, but they'll still function for the waders, but at the same time getting water into your reed beds. Yeah, just before I leave birds, again, this is just considerations on habitat work around getting more birds nesting on there. So I'm quite conscious we have trees along the edges of the wet grassland. So it's a bit of an issue in terms of predation. What we've noticed with the lapwing, the closest that they'll nest is probably about 125 metres on the car park field. They won't nest closer. Generally, the wading birds will just avoid sort of those high points for fear of predation. So if you map that sort of 125 metre radius around basically the trees that we have on site, it basically shrinks that kind of usable area of wet grassland quite considerably. So I guess I'm just thinking, you know, is that something that we should manage for? I mean, it really is probably, but so some of these, I suppose, the worst offending trees we've started to take out. So this one's gone, and again, these ones some of you may notice we've taken out, and this one as well. So possibly the ones around Homer Green Ponds as well may need to come out, some of the taller ones, and I think that would again just encourage more breeding, more nesting within the wet grassland. I guess, yeah, the other side of that, obviously there's birds that use and like those sort of taller trees, things like kestrel may nest in them, so it's kind of weighing it all up. Screening, again, I'm just very conscious of footfall on site and potential disturbance. What we find is, I mean, birds tend to habituate to that. They don't seem that bothered with, you know, people moving through, but again, as the site gets busier and through lockdown, through COVID, it's been very busy, and it just makes you think, is that something, do we need to screen these areas better? So potentially putting in like reedy ditches, maybe more hedges. Yeah, there's things there to think about and probably to do, and that would potentially help again get more birds on the wet grasslands. Moving away from birds, obviously the site is better for quite a lot of oh hell, I've just looked at the time, it's 10 to 7. Do I need to stop? No, okay.
No, keep going.
All right, sorry.
Right.
Yeah, yeah, obviously other wildlife in sight. So what have we got? Yeah, dragonflies, butterflies. Again, these are sort of species that we want to attract on site. So I think we're up to about sorry, I've written the numbers down. Yeah, we've got 19 butterflies on site at the minute, 19 butterfly species and 16 dragonfly species, which again is pretty good. 13 species of breeding dragonfly. Sorry, and yeah. So that again, yeah, that's pretty good, but there's a lot of habitat work around that we need to do. Just we can make the site better for those species, we can get more on there. So that comes back to, yeah, I suppose with the butterflies, it's about increasing the nectar sources predominantly, and especially the food plants. So do you remember I talked about that dry grassland? So we've done quite a lot of meadow creation work in here, quite a lot of seeding. So this is this upper area that we've seeded with a mix. That's doing really well at the minute. Again, this is just another area that we've seeded running up to the hide. We're very much lacking particularly early nectar sources in sight. So yeah, trying to get things in that will flower early is a bit of a priority on there. I mean, again, because it's a new site, because it's sort of ex-agricultural, there's not much in the way of nectar sources on there, wildflowers, so just anything that we can add in helps. So that's quite a big theme, and it's been nice. This is just a picture of an orchid. As well as the stuff that we're seeding in, you can kind of see wild plants just moving in around that seeding work, which is really, really good. So yeah, that's a big theme on site. The plants that we're putting in, we tend to buy a lot with funding and whatnot, but the volunteers are also growing up plants to put in, and it's a case of every plant helps, you know, whether we're putting in 500 plants from a funder or, you know, sort of 10 plants of scabious that someone's growing. It's just getting plants in there. So the tray on the left, that's our Liverpool volunteers have been growing stuff up on the windowsills. And this is one that the pot growing stuff is one of our Lunt volunteers is growing in her greenhouse. White letter hairstreak is, yeah, this is one of the butterfly species on site or just on the edge of the site. They breed in Ruffley's Wood. Obviously, you can see by the distribution map, they're not a common species, so to have those on the edge of the site is fantastic. And again, that's a species that we're trying to encourage. We've been doing a lot of hedge planting, and within that hedge planting, we're adding elm, which is the main food plant of white letter hairstreak. Obviously, yeah, other plants like alder buckthorn we're adding in there for the brimstone butterfly. So a lot of the plants that we're adding are quite sort of carefully chosen to benefit a particular butterfly or yeah, dragonfly species as well. Ponds for dragonflies is quite a big theme as well. So you might notice, yeah, for me, you can't have enough ponds in a wetland basically. So if you know that you've got the main hedge line that runs down, so basically what we're trying to do is just add a lot of ponds in it along that that are separate from the main wetland. They're partly for amphibians and they are also for dragonflies. We've tried to do dragonfly walks on site, but you can never see anything because the wetland's so far away. So the idea is to bring these ponds closer so that you can actually see things as you're walking on site. So yeah, these are just some of the ponds going in, and that's not finished. Again, BIFA have funded another cycle of that work. So what we need to do is work back over these ponds, make some of them deeper, add some more. We need to plant them up, and we also need to fence them to keep out dogs, which stir up the water, fishes with turbidity, and just trampling the plants that you're trying to get going in there. So yeah, that's a big theme over the next couple of years. Nearly finished it. And also survey needs. I guess this comes back to, I mean, this is for me, this is why the HLF is really important. I guess for me, site management is about asking questions. It's about trying to understand what's happening on your site, and I guess trying to explore what's going on to make it better. So there's so much stuff that we don't know about that we haven't surveyed that we need to. So, you know, for example, the vole populations of small mammals, we've done a bit of surveying on that, but you know, there's different types of rough. You've got the grassland habitats on site. You've got rough grassland. You've got kind of medium, sort of the greyest grasslands, and then you've got sort of very short grassland areas as well. So it's kind of saying, you know, which of the grassland types is best for the small mammals. Typically, that should be the kind of slightly longer grassland, but you know, the rough grassland on site, is that, for instance, are there small mammals in that now? Is it just too rank? Do we need to manage that? So if we can get in, for instance, and survey that and just see what the vole populations are like, and then, you know, we'll just know, yeah, we need to start managing that, get more voles in, obviously, to benefit the owls, the hunting birds on site. Aquatic invertebrates, really big thing in the site, just in terms of food chains. Yeah, for the other species we want to attract, but at the minute we've never been able to survey. We don't know what's in there. We don't know how well, you know, the water bodies are doing in that regard. So if we could get in and do some surveys to see what's there, one to kind of know if we're on track, or, you know, do we need to add more aquatic plants? Do we need to make the water bodies better for the aquatics? Moss, again, really important for bearded tit, for instance. There's some moss species that are very much associated with reed beds that they would feed on. It would be great to know if we have those in our reed beds, and yeah, just monitor. So many questions, so many things to survey over the next few years, where we'll bring in people with expertise in that, but probably try and run workshops around it as well, so, you know, other people can learn and we can sort of take that knowledge into the site. So yeah, I'm just sorry, I'm going to finish. I was going to talk about water voles and where the water voles have gone, but quite conscious of time, so I'm not
Oh,
mentioning the
look at it
volunteers,
though.
which I
They're
have
so
to do.
cute.
Yeah, again, just to say, I mean, obviously all the work that gets done on site is through the volunteers, groups from Liverpool and the Lunt group, which work on there weekly. So they do basically everything that you see from, you know, they've put in the hides, yeah, a lot of the access features, the habitat work, filling in the potholes, planting the reed. Yeah, so they're very much a critical element of the site, and the habitat work that we want to do moving forward. Yeah, that's it. Sorry, I've run over.
That's great.
Yeah, that's the next event. So yeah, if people do have questions, that's my email. It's yeah, agraham@lanxwt.org.uk. There's also a kind of drop-in session where you can come and ask questions if there's anything you want to ask about in what I've talked about. That's next Wednesday, so you can book on, you email Molly, this is the email address here. So that's next Wednesday from 12 to 1. Just call in and ask questions about this, or if there's any other issues or aspects on site you want to ask about, please do. And the next talk is on the 24th, and that's from 6 to 7. And again, you just book on as with this, and it's on yeah, sustainable urban drainage and kind of the flooding. Yeah, just more around the kind of flood storage aspects of the site. Yeah, I'll stop talking.
That's great, thank you, Adam. There's lots to get in, isn't there? But I think we will just probably spend maybe 5-10 minutes just going through a few more questions. I appreciate some people might have to leave, but we will be circulating the link to the recording of the session, which will be on YouTube, or you can find it on our YouTube page if you'd like to catch up with that. But no, it's fascinating to see your squiggles come to life, as you said, and just, you know, all the hard work there, and the impact that's having on breeding birds. And I'm going to start off with a really basic question that I probably should know the answer to. So when you're counting breeding birds, do you count the nests?
Yeah, we have a volunteer, Tony, who does that survey work. So yeah, he'll do 3 cycles, I think, of walking over and just plotting. Yeah, plotting where the
Right.
basically where there's a. I think he did singing males last year, but yeah, generally it's just observing where the birds are going into.
Okay.
From that.
And then what about breeding butterflies?
That's, I guess, just the ones that would be resident within the UK. So yeah, it's that are yeah, that are you'd sort of get in our area typically. We would really just can't do.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So we've had a couple of questions. We've typed some of the answers in, but there's a question from Peter, who asks, if reed bed 2 was deepened, wouldn't that provide more wet reed bed, greater flood storage capacity, and reduce flooding of roosting sites and wet meadows?
It would, yes. I guess the issue, well, there's a few issues with that. It's in making it deeper. I mean, if say you just bulldozed it and made it deeper, again, then the problem is, well, you've got a huge amount of earth that you need to do something with once you've taken it out. And I suppose it's also about the balance. Yeah, it's kind of, well, I suppose it's economics, it's the cost of that, but it's also the balance of, you know, bringing that water through the system. You're bringing water through, yeah, your wet grasslands, your reed bed. You kind of need the levels right in them all. Sorry, I'm not answering that very well. I might need to have a think. And
yeah, that's okay. We're putting you on the spot, aren't we?
Can I just say a bit on that? I think as well, Adam, isn't it right that the reed only grows on certain levels as well? So just because you make the pool deeper won't increase your reed bed size.
Yeah. It's up to about a metre generally with reed. So if you just put in a massive kind of reservoir, a lagoon, yeah, you just end up with a big pond, basically a big pool, which isn't that great for anything. I mean, the Environment Agency could have done that. I suppose they could have just put in massive pools, which would have maximised the flood storage. But it's that balance between it being a flood storage site and a nature reserve. So what they've done instead, I guess, is put in these. It's a compromise. It's trying to get it about right. Put in these channels, so the depth is about 1 metre maximum. So it's letting the reed spread, but at the same time not being too deep for the reed. If that makes sense.
Okay. And there was a suggestion from Stan. Have we considered floating roost platforms for waders when increasing the water levels in the reed bed?
We've thought about rafts for some species, possibly terns. We thought we could maybe get with rafts, but I don't really think they work for waders. With waders, you generally need sort of, if you think of an island, it's kind of functionally linked into the kind of land around it. You know, the chicks they've only got little legs, if you like, so if they're going off a raft, they're going into deep water, whereas if they're on an island, they're kind of going into very shallow water, and they can find their depths to feed within that, rather than just being plummeted into, it wouldn't really work in deep water.
I know they've got tern rafts at Brockholes, but I've not heard of the waders ones.
Yeah, more islands really than rafts.
Okay, just having a look to see if there's any more questions come in. Okay, so a question around the avocet chicks. So many avocet chicks were lost to mink last year. Have the mink traps been effective? From Dave.
Not yet is the short answer. Minks seem to come and go from the site. So that was a couple of years ago. We had one on site and it seemed to decimate everything. Last year, they didn't seem to be an issue. Not yet. It's something that we monitor for. And obviously, if they're on site, then we try and trap them. Yeah, it's hard to get them to go into the traps. So.
Great. Okay, so I don't think have I missed any questions, Molly or Cheryl? Have I got them all, do you think?
I don't think so. I think there are some that we've answered online for people because they were quite sort of lengthy answers. But I think the main thing is that obviously Molly and Adam's emails have been on screen. You know, people can email me, or they can always ring us if there's any more questions, certainly. And obviously there's the green drinks event next Wednesday as well, which the last one that we held, we went on for at least an hour, if not longer, and there were lots of questions there, so it was really good. Actually, it's a bit more informal, so people can just ask away.
Yeah, and we'll circulate the link to that as well, to everybody who signed up for this talk.
Yes, we will. That's great. And then I've just posted a link in the chat to our website if anybody wants to find out a bit more about membership or making a donation, or how they can support Lancashire Wildlife Trust. And then I think we should leave it there until next time. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Adam. Have a nice evening.
Yes.
Bye-bye.
Right. Thanks. Bye.